You're listening to the top cheating audio stories. Enjoy your listening experience. I never thought I'd be sitting here, typing this out for strangers on the internet. I mean, this isn't the kind of thing you ever imagine sharing. At least, not until it happens to you, and suddenly, your world doesn't make sense anymore. But here I am, and I'm still in shock. My name is David, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. I'm 36, been married to Linda for 10 years. She's 34, and we've been together since we were kids, practically inseparable from the start. We don't have any kids yet, but we've been talking about it. At least we used to. We live in a small, working-class town. It's nothing fancy, but it's home. I work as a foreman for a construction company. Hard, honest work that keeps me busy, but I've always made sure to leave time for Linda. She works as a receptionist at a local clinic under this guy named Paul. He's her boss, a guy I've only met a handful of times. Polished, always dressed too sharp for a small-town clinic, and he's got that easy charm that people like, but I always thought he was a little too slick. Linda's always been the social one between us. She's got this warmth about her, you know? She's always making people laugh. Always planning something with her friend Karen. They've been close since high school, like sisters. Most weekends, if she wasn't at home with me, she was with Karen, grabbing coffee, or doing whatever it is they do. That was our life, simple, comfortable. Or so I thought. But then, something changed. It was small at first, so small that I almost didn't notice. A shift, like she was pulling away, but quietly. She started staying late at work more often, saying they had extra paperwork or some new project. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I know what it's like when work gets busy. But it wasn't just the late nights. She'd come home, and instead of our usual routine, cooking dinner together, sitting on the couch watching TV, she'd head straight to the bedroom and say she was tired. Sometimes, she wouldn't even kiss me goodnight. The real kicker, though, was her phone. She was never one to hide anything, but recently, she'd started keeping it face down on the table or taking calls in another room. I'd ask who it was, and she'd always say, "Oh, just Karen," like it was nothing. But I could feel something gnawing at me. I told myself I was overreacting, being paranoid. After all, we'd been together for 10 years. How could anything be wrong? But it didn't stop. A few weeks ago, she started going out more on the weekends. Always with Karen, always with some excuse about needing girl time. She'd laugh it off when I asked if I could tag along, saying, "You wouldn't enjoy it, trust me." At first, I let it slide. Karen's a good friend, right? What harm could there be? Still, something about it didn't sit right. I'd catch her glancing at her phone like she was waiting for something, but when I'd ask, she'd just shrug it off. Then, one night, after she'd gotten back late from dinner with Karen, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, not at first, but it buzzed and I glanced at the screen. The message was from Paul. Just his name on the screen was enough to make my stomach twist, but it was the words that hit me like a punch. "Had a great time tonight. You looked amazing in that dress." I just stared at it, frozen, like my brain couldn't catch up to what I was seeing. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. I swiped the screen and opened the message thread, my heart pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it from the other room. The conversation wasn't long. Nothing overtly sexual. Nothing you could point to and say, "This is proof." But it was enough. There were little compliments sprinkled in, jokes about their late nights at work, and plenty of smiley faces. It was the kind of conversation that felt intimate, not something you'd share with just your boss. I put the phone down and sat there in the dark, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? Was it just flirting, or was there more? I felt like an idiot, sitting there with all these questions and no answers. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed to keep my cool. I needed to know more. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just sit on this. Over breakfast, I asked her casually, "How was dinner with Karen last night?" She didn't miss a beat. It was nice. We talked for hours, lost track of time. I felt my hands tighten around the coffee mug. "You sure it wasn't with Paul?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw the message, Linda. The one from Paul. He said you looked amazing last night." Her face paled, and for a second, I thought she was going to crumble, maybe tell me the truth. But instead, she scoffed, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Oh, that? David, you're being ridiculous. Paul was just joking." We all went out for drinks after work. It wasn't a big deal. Drinks after work? You told me you were with Karen. She hesitated just for a moment, but it was enough. Well, Karen came too. We were all there. I didn't buy it. I could see it in her eyes. She was lying. But I couldn't prove it. Not yet. The conversation ended there, with her brushing past me to get ready for work. But that text had opened a door I couldn't close. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out exactly what. As I stood in the kitchen that morning, staring at her phone on the counter, I knew things were about to get a whole lot worse. I just had no idea how deep this would go, or how much my world was about to unravel. The days after that conversation with Linda were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger, and I just needed to push a little harder to see what was really going on. Her denial about the text didn't sit right with me. The way she brushed it off, it was too easy, too convenient. But without proof, I was stuck in my own head, chasing suspicions that wouldn't let me sleep. Then about a week later, Linda dropped the next bomb. "We've got a work dinner coming up this Friday," she said over breakfast, casually, like it was just another day. "Paul's organized it for the clinic staff, some kind of professional networking thing. It's just us from the office, so, no plus ones." I nodded, but something about the way she said it. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Where's the dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, trying to play it cool. "It's at that Italian place downtown, Bellini's. You know the one." She smiled a little too brightly. "I probably won't be home until late." I could feel that familiar knot tighten in my chest. "Right? Well, have fun." And just like that, the conversation moved on. But in my mind, the gears were turning, each piece of this puzzle clicking into place. Friday rolled around, and I tried to act normal. I even kissed her goodbye before she left, dressed up in a fitted black dress I hadn't seen her wear in years. She told me it was just work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was dressing for something or someone else. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my jacket and headed to Josh's bar. I needed a distraction, something to keep me from obsessing over what she was really doing. Josh had been my best friend for years. He ran this little dive bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where regulars came to disappear into their drinks. It was exactly what I needed that night. The moment I walked in, Josh spotted me from behind the bar. "David, my man, haven't seen you in a few days. You good?" He slid a beer across the counter before I even asked. I sat down heavily, shaking my head. "Not really." He raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. Josh wasn't the kind of guy to pry, but he could read people like an open book. He always knew when something was off. "It's Linda," I said, taking a swig of the beer. "Something's going on? I don't know what yet, but I've got this feeling, She's been acting weird, secretive. I caught this text from Paul, her boss, and she's brushing it off like it's nothing." Josh frowned, leaning on the bar. "Paul? That slick guy from the clinic? I've seen him around. Looks like the type who thinks he can charm his way out of anything." "That's the one," I said. "She's at a dinner with him and the office staff tonight. But I can't shake the feeling that something's not right." Josh tapped his fingers against the bar, thinking. "You ever thought about following her?" "Not in a creepy way," he added quickly. "But if she's lying, you need to know, man." I hesitated. "You think I should?" "I think," Josh said, his voice low and serious, "if your gut is screaming at you, you should listen to it. You've been with Linda a long time. You know when something's off." The more I thought about it, the more his words sank in. What was the harm in checking? If I was wrong, fine. I'd feel like an idiot, but at least I'd know. But if I was right, I didn't even want to finish that thought. I drained my beer and stood up, my heart thudding in my chest. "You're right. I'm going." Josh gave me a firm nod, sliding me another beer to go, a silent gesture of support. "Text me if you need backup." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks, man." It didn't take me long to get to Bellini's. The restaurant was in the heart of downtown, a cozy spot with soft lighting and candlelit tables. Exactly the kind of place that screamed romance, not work. I parked across the street, keeping a low profile in case anyone from the clinic happened to walk out. I didn't know what I was expecting, but my gut was twisting the closer I got. I waited there, watching people come and go, but there was no sign of Linda. After about half an hour, I started to feel like maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really was inside with her colleagues. Just as I was about to leave, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Across the street, just a few doors down from Bellini's, was the entrance to the Grandview Hotel, a swanky, upscale place where people booked rooms for anniversaries or secret meetings. And there, sitting in the front lobby near the floor-to-ceiling windows, was Linda. She wasn't alone. She was sitting across from Paul at a small table, the two of them leaning in close, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Linda's face was lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, and it was like someone punched me in the gut. It wasn't a professional dinner. This wasn't work. This was something else entirely. My breath caught in my throat, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? I leaned closer, keeping my eyes fixed on them. Linda reached for her glass of wine, laughing at something Paul said. He smiled, leaning in closer, his hand brushing hers lightly, casually, as if they'd done this 1,000 times. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted out of the car, crossing the street like a man on a mission. My heart was hammering in my chest, anger boiling under my skin. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I couldn't just stand by and watch. But before I could reach the hotel entrance, Paul stood up. He said something to Linda, and she smiled, actually smiled, and stood up too. They didn't even bother to leave separately. They walked out together, right past the lobby windows and toward the elevator. I stopped in my tracks, frozen. This wasn't just dinner. This was something more, something I wasn't ready to admit. They disappeared behind the elevator doors, leaving me standing there like a fool. The night air felt cold against my skin, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like everything I thought I knew had just shattered in front of me. I didn't sleep that night. After seeing Linda and Paul walk into that elevator together, it was like the world had shifted under my feet. Every thought I had circled back to one thing. She was lying, and now there was no denying it. The knot in my chest wouldn't loosen, and I couldn't stop running the scene through my mind. The way she smiled at him, the casual touch, how she didn't even bother to hide it. This wasn't just some flirty text. This was something much bigger. By the time I dragged myself home, it was close to dawn. I sat in the dark kitchen, the house unnervingly quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a faint buzz that somehow amplified the silence. I knew I had to confront her, but the thought of hearing her deny it again made me feel sick. There was no point waiting, no use pretending. I'd seen what I'd seen. It was about 8 in the morning when Linda came through the door. She didn't notice me at first, sitting there in the corner of the kitchen, still in the clothes I'd worn the night before. I watched her move, all casual like it was just another Saturday morning. She kicked off her shoes and stretched, looking relaxed. That was what set me off. The ease in her movements, like nothing had happened. "Where the hell were you last night?" My voice was sharper than I intended, cutting through the quiet. She jumped, startled, her eyes wide as she finally spotted me. "Jesus, David, you scared me," she said, clutching her chest dramatically. "What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "I asked you a question," I said, not moving, just watching her. Linda frowned, her hands still lingering on her chest. "I told you I was at a work dinner." "Why are you?" "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't lie to me." Her face twisted into confusion, or maybe she was trying to fake it. "I'm not lying. What's going on with you?" "I saw you, Linda," I said, finally standing up. "I went to Bellini's last night." "You weren't there. You were at the Grandview Hotel with Paul. I saw you walk in together." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a second, she just stood there, frozen like she'd been caught in headlights. "David, it's not." "Don't," I said again, my voice harder now. "I don't want to hear another excuse. I want the truth. I know what I saw." She took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to the door, like she was considering making a run for it. "It's not what you think." That phrase. I was so sick of hearing it. "Really? So, you weren't having drinks with him in the hotel lobby? You weren't laughing with him like you hadn't a care in the world?" She bit her lip, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She was calculating, figuring out how much she could spin, how much I knew. "We were just talking," she finally said, her voice smaller now. "It was a work thing." "A work thing?" I repeated, disbelief coating every word. "At a hotel? After lying to me about being at a dinner?" She didn't answer right away, just stared at me like I was being unreasonable. The silence hung between us, thick and heavy, and I could feel the rage building in my chest. "For God's sake, Linda, stop lying," I shouted, slamming my hand down on the counter. "Just admit it. Admit that you've been sneaking around with him." Her face twisted, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something hard like anger or maybe guilt. Then she crossed her arms, her defensive wall shooting up like I'd just attacked her. "Fine," she snapped, her voice suddenly cold. "You want the truth, David? Yeah, I've been seeing him. Is that what you wanted to hear?" The words hit me like a sledgehammer, even though I already knew. Just hearing them, spoken out loud, made everything real in a way that seeing it couldn't. I felt my throat tighten, but I wasn't about to back down now. "How long?" I asked, my voice low, almost a growl. "How long has this been going on?" Linda let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Does it really matter? What difference does it make now?" "How long, Linda?" I repeated, my fists clenched, shaking with the effort it took to stay calm. She stared at me for a moment, her eyes narrowing, as if daring me to keep pushing. "A few months." I knew she was lying. There was no way this was just a few months, not with how comfortable they were together. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't telling me everything. "Bullshit," I said, stepping closer. "You're lying again. I want the truth." "Why, David?" she shot back, her voice rising. "What's the point? It won't change anything." "Because I deserve to know," I shouted, my patience snapping. "You owe me that much, after everything." There was a long pause, and for the first time, I saw her resolve crumble. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked away, like she couldn't stand to meet my eyes anymore. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's been longer than a few months." I waited, my heart pounding in my ears, my entire body tense, bracing for whatever came next. "It started 2 years ago," she admitted, her voice flat, like she was reciting something she had rehearsed. "When you lost your job, and everything was falling apart. I didn't plan for it to happen, but it just did." My mind blanked for a moment. 2 years? This hadn't just been a recent fling. This had been going on while I was at my lowest, struggling to get back on my feet. All those nights I spent worrying, thinking I wasn't good enough, beating myself up over how hard things had been. She had been with him. Paul, the man she worked with every day, the man she lied to me about. 2 years? I repeated, feeling my voice crack. "You've been lying to me for 2 years. Linda's face was unreadable now, her expression a mask of cold indifference. "I wasn't happy, David. You were never home. You were always working or stressing about work or... So this is my fault?" I interrupted, rage boiling over again. "You're saying you cheated on me because I was trying to provide for us? Because I was trying to save our goddamn marriage?" "You weren't trying to save anything," she snapped, her voice sharp. "You were just surviving. You weren't there for me, not the way I needed." "Paul, he was there." "Paul was there," I echoed, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Paul was there for you, so you decided to screw him behind my back. Great logic, Linda." She flinched, but her resolve didn't break this time. "It wasn't just about the sex," she said quietly. "He listened to me, David. He made me feel like I mattered. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead, I just stood there, staring at her, realizing that the woman in front of me wasn't the Linda I thought I knew. This was someone else, someone who had been lying to me for years, someone who could look me in the eye and still blame me for her betrayal. I felt something snap inside me, like a rope that had been pulled too tight for too long. "You know what?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." Linda blinked, surprised by the sudden shift. "What do you mean you're done?" I said, stepping back. "I'm leaving. I can't stay here and pretend everything's fine when you've been lying to me for 2 years. You've destroyed us, Linda. There's no coming back from this." She stared at me, her face going pale, but she didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the door slamming behind me as I left her standing there in the wreckage of our marriage. I didn't go back to the house that night. After walking out, I found myself at Josh's bar without even realizing how I got there. It was instinct, like I was drawn to the one place I knew I wouldn't have to explain myself, not yet anyway. The bar was half empty when I arrived, which suited me just fine. I didn't want to be around people. I just needed a place to sit and think. Josh was behind the bar, wiping down glasses when I came in. He looked up, his brow furrowing the moment he saw me. David, man, what happened? I slid onto the stool, barely able to make eye contact. You were right, I said, the words feeling like acid in my mouth. About Linda. She's been seeing Paul. For 2 years. Josh stopped what he was doing and set the glass down slowly. 2 years? He repeated, incredulous. What the hell, man? Yeah, I muttered, running my hand through my hair. 2 years. She lied about everything, said it started when I was out of work, that she felt neglected. But, Jesus, 2 years. He shook his head, pouring me a whiskey without even asking. That's messed up. I'm sorry, man. You didn't deserve that. I took the glass, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching it all happen to someone else. What the hell do I do now, Josh? She lied to me for years. I thought I knew her. Josh leaned on the bar, looking me dead in the eye. You can't stay, David. You can't. She's been lying to your face. And it's not just some fling. It's 2 years. That's not something you fix with an apology. I didn't say anything. I knew he was right, but the thought of leaving, the thought of walking away from everything we built, everything I thought was real, felt impossible. How do you just walk away from 10 years of marriage, from the woman you loved? Josh must have seen the conflict in my face because he sighed and pulled up a stool behind the bar. Look, I know this sucks. I get it, but you need to take a step back. Hell, talk to a lawyer at the very least. You got rights in this, man. Don't let her screw you over more than she already has. I nodded, still numb. I know. I will. I don't know where to start. Well, start by not going back there tonight, he said firmly. Stay here if you need to. We'll figure it out in the morning. I appreciated the offer, but I couldn't stay. I needed to clear my head, needed to process everything. So, after a few hours of sitting in silence, I thanked Josh and headed out, leaving the bar behind as the cold night air hit me. I drove aimlessly, not really thinking about where I was going until I found myself parked outside the clinic. Paul's clinic. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark building. Paul! The guy who'd been smiling at me all those times I'd stopped by to pick Linda up from work. The guy who'd probably laughed behind my back while he was sleeping with my wife. The anger that had been simmering under the surface started to bubble over again, but there was nothing I could do now. No one to punch, no door to kick down. It was just me, sitting in the dark, wondering how deep this betrayal really went. The next day, I called a lawyer. Josh was right. I needed to protect myself, make sure I didn't get blindsided any more than I already had. I didn't tell Linda. I couldn't talk to her yet, couldn't even stand the thought of being in the same room. I was running on autopilot, doing what I needed to do without really feeling anything. But that's when things started getting even stranger. As if finding out about the affair wasn't enough, I started digging into Paul, who he was, what kind of life he had. I didn't know why I needed to know, but there was this nagging feeling that I wasn't getting the whole story. So I did what anyone would do. I went online. It didn't take long to find something that stopped me cold. Turns out, Paul wasn't just cheating with Linda. He had a history of this. I found a few posts on some old local forums, rumors, mostly, but enough to make me sick. Apparently, Paul had been caught in affairs before, though his wife, Clara, had always managed to keep things quiet. He was known for being a smooth talker, someone who could charm his way out of anything. It was his reputation, and somehow, I'd missed it. I had to know more. I couldn't sit with just rumors, so I went to the one person who might know something, Karen. Linda's best friend. I called Karen, playing it cool. I didn't want to tip my hand. Not until I knew what she knew. We met at a coffee shop, one of those chain places she loved, and I could tell from the moment she walked in that she was nervous. I wondered why, wondered if she knew that I knew. Hey, David, she said, giving me a half-hearted smile as she sat down across from me. How are you holding up? I shrugged. Not great, Karen. Not great. She looked down at her coffee, stirring it with a little plastic stick. Yeah, I can imagine. Linda told me you found out. I leaned forward, my voice low. How long have you known? Karen froze, her eyes widening for just a second before she quickly composed herself. What do you mean? Don't, I said, the anger rising in my throat. Don't lie to me. I know you've been covering for her. I know you've been helping her hide this. She blinked, trying to find words, but I wasn't letting her off the hook. How long? Get in. How long have you known she's been screwing her boss? She looked down at her coffee again, guilt all over her face. David, it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. That's funny. Linda said the same thing. Karen's hands were shaking now, and she let out a long breath. I'm sorry. I didn't want to get involved. Linda, she made me promise not to say anything. She said she was going to end it, that it was just a mistake. I didn't know it had been going on this long, I swear. How long? Get in. I asked again, my voice ice cold. She swallowed hard. About a year. I leaned back, letting the weight of her words sink in. A year. I repeated, the rage bubbling under the surface again. You've been lying to me for a year, covering for her, helping her cheat, and you didn't think I deserved to know? She looked up at me, tears in her eyes now. I didn't want to hurt you, David. I thought maybe she'd end it, and everything would go back to normal. Normal. I spat the word out like it was poison. You thought everything would just go back to normal after a year of lies? Karen was crying now, but I didn't care. I was too far gone, too consumed by the betrayal. You were supposed to be my friend, Karen. I trusted you. And all this time, you were helping her sneak around. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. Yeah, well, sorry doesn't fix this. You helped destroy my marriage. I walked out without looking back, leaving Karen behind in her tears. I didn't have the energy to deal with her anymore. One betrayal was enough, but two, I couldn't take it. As I got back in the car, it hit me all over again. This wasn't just about Linda and Paul anymore. This went deeper. Karen had been involved, maybe others too. How many people had known? How long had they all been lying to my face? I started the engine, feeling more lost than ever. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about trust, and mine was completely shattered. After leaving Karen behind in that coffee shop, I didn't waste any time. I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole mess went deeper than just Linda and Paul. I had already uncovered more than I ever wanted to know, but now, the need for answers was driving me forward. One name kept ringing in my head, Clara, Paul's wife. I didn't know much about her, other than the polite exchanges we'd had during social gatherings. From the outside, Paul and Clara seemed like the perfect couple, the kind that people pointed to and said, they've got it all figured out. But after everything I'd learned, I doubted that image was anywhere near the truth. I didn't want to blindside her, but she had to know the truth. More importantly, I had to know if she already knew about it, about everything. Was she another victim, like me? Or had she been complicit in Paul's lies? I managed to get Clara's number from an old contact list I found buried in one of Linda's drawers at home. It felt strange calling her like this, but I didn't see any other option. She answered on the second ring, her voice pleasant but cautious. I guess it wasn't every day her husband's colleague's husband called her out of the blue. David, she asked, a little confusion in her tone. Is everything okay? Hi, Clara. There's something important we need to talk about. It's about Paul and Linda. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's been something going on between them, and I thought you deserved to know. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like she'd been waiting for this. I see. Why don't we meet in person, David? I think this conversation deserves more than a phone call. I agreed, and we set a time to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town, far enough from where we lived to keep things quiet. I didn't know what to expect, but part of me was ready for her to react the way I had, with shock, anger, maybe even tears. But when I walked into the cafe the next day, Clara was already there, sitting at a corner table, perfectly composed. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her face a calm mask of poise. David, she greeted me, with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought you might reach out. I sat down, feeling a strange sense of unease. You knew. Clara took a sip of her coffee, then set the cup down carefully. Yet suspicions. For a long time, actually. But Paul, he's very good at keeping secrets, or at least he thinks he is. I stared at her, unsure of what to say. How long have you known? She looked out the window for a moment, her expression unreadable. It started with little things, late nights at the office, vague excuses, canceled plans. The kind of things you tell yourself are just part of life, part of being married to someone who's busy with work. But then I started noticing patterns. He'd come home with the smell of someone else's perfume on his clothes. It wasn't the first time he's done this, David. Linda, she's not the only one. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and bitter. I didn't know whether to feel relieved that I wasn't the only one who'd been blindsided or sickened by how deep this all ran. He's done this before? Clara nodded, her voice soft but steady. There have been others. I never had solid proof, just suspicions. But I'm not stupid. I knew he was having affairs, and I knew he was careful. Too careful to get caught. Until now. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Why didn't you confront him? Why didn't you do something? Her lips curled into a bitter smile. Do you think I haven't thought about it? We have children, David. And Paul is the kind of man who values his image more than anything. He built that clinic, his career, on being the upstanding family man. If I exposed him, if I made a scene, it wouldn't just ruin him. It would ruin us. Our kids. I hadn't considered that. How much Paul's public image mattered to him, and how much Clara had to lose by blowing it up. So, you just let him keep doing it? Clara's eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind that calm exterior. Not exactly. A few months ago, I hired a private investigator. I blinked. You hired someone to follow him? Yes, she said, her voice now laced with the cool detachment of someone who'd planned every step carefully. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. And I got it. Paul's been meeting Linda at hotels for months, but that's not all. The investigator uncovered even more other women going back years. Women who worked at the clinic, some outside of it. He's been doing this for as long as we've been married. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what she was telling me. So, why haven't you confronted him yet? If you have all this proof, Clara let out a slow breath. Because Paul's reputation isn't just about him. It's about our entire life. Our family. If I destroy him publicly, everything we've built comes crashing down. I've been waiting for the right moment. Waiting until I could use this to secure a future for myself and my kids without him. The pieces started clicking into place. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was about power, about leverage. Clara was holding the cards, waiting for the perfect time to play them. So, what now? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Clara looked at me, her expression hard. Now, I need your help. My heart raced. My help. She nodded. I'm going to confront Paul, but I need you to back me up. If he thinks it's just me, he'll try to weasel his way out of it, like he always does. But if you come forward too, if we both expose him, he won't have anywhere to run. I want to take him down, David. And I think you do too. I didn't answer right away. The thought of bringing Paul down, of finally confronting him face to face, felt like the closure I needed. But this was more complicated than I'd anticipated. Clara wasn't just another victim. She was a strategist playing a long game. She'd been waiting for this. You think this will destroy him? I asked, a bitter edge in my voice. Clara leaned forward, her eyes cold and calculating. I know it will. And when it does, I'll make sure he's left with nothing. A part of me hesitated. Was this really the road I wanted to go down? Did I want to get dragged into this web of revenge and manipulation? But then I thought about Linda, about how she'd lied to me for 2 years, about how Paul had played me for a fool. Clara must have sensed my hesitation. I know you're angry, David. I know you want justice, but this isn't just about revenge. This is about making sure men like Paul don't get to walk all over people like us. You and I, we deserve better. She was right. I didn't want justice. I wanted Paul to feel the weight of everything he'd done, to be exposed for the liar he was. And if Clara was offering me a way to do that, then maybe I needed to take it. I nodded slowly, meeting her gaze. All right, I'm in. Clara's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't one of relief. It was the smile of someone who knew they'd just won. Good. Now let's bring him down. The plan was simple. Clara and I would expose Paul's affair with Linda in the most public way possible. Clara had all the evidence she needed. Photos, messages, even hotel receipts from the private investigator she'd hired. We would time it perfectly, hitting Paul where it hurt most. At work, at the clinic he prided himself on, where his image as a respectable family man was tied to his success. It felt surreal, sitting in Clara's car the morning it all went down. We parked across from the clinic, watching the employees file in, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Clara was calm, focused. I had to give her credit. She was damn good at playing the part of the composed wife, even if behind that mask was something far more calculating. "You ready?" she asked, glancing at me. I nodded, though my stomach churned. "Yeah, let's do it." Clara smiled slightly, then reached for her phone. It was all about timing. She had everything queued up, emails containing the evidence of Paul's affairs, ready to be sent to the clinic board members, staff, even a few select clients. Her private investigator had gathered enough dirt to make sure no one could ignore what was coming. Linda would be exposed alongside Paul, caught in the same trap. She pressed send, and it was done. I went to the clinic a few hours later. Clara stayed behind. She didn't need to be there to watch it all crumble, but I did. I had to see it with my own eyes. When I walked through the door, the atmosphere was already tense. Staff members were whispering in the hallways, casting nervous glances at Paul's office. It was like they knew something big was happening, but didn't quite understand what. I caught sight of Linda at the reception desk, her face pale, her fingers nervously tapping against the counter. She saw me, and for a moment, I saw pure panic in her eyes. She knew. She knew everything was about to unravel, and there was no stopping it. I didn't speak to her, just kept walking. I headed straight for Paul's office, my heart pounding in my chest. I had played this moment over in my head 1,000 times, the moment I would confront the man who had helped tear my life apart. Paul was sitting at his desk when I barged in, the door slamming behind me. He looked up surprised but not scared. "Not yet." "David," he started, standing up. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer at first, just stood there, staring at him. The man who had smiled at me, who had shaken my hand like we were friends, all while sleeping with my wife. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to punch him right then and there. "You know what I'm doing here, Paul," I said, my voice low, seething with barely controlled rage. His expression flickered, just for a moment, and I knew he understood. He knew his game was up. But Paul being Paul, he tried to weasel his way out, like Clara had predicted. "Look, David," he said, his tone smooth, like he could talk his way out of this. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything." I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Linda, the other women. I know about the hotels, the lies. It's over, Paul. And everyone knows now. Everyone." The color drained from his face. I could see him processing what that meant, his career, his reputation, all of it about to go up in flames. "You don't understand," he stammered, trying to regain control. It wasn't serious. Linda, she needed someone. Shut up," I snapped, taking a step forward, my fist clenched so hard I thought my knuckles might crack. "Don't you dare try to blame this on her. You did this. You and her. And now, you're going to pay for it." For a moment, I thought he might fight back, but then his shoulders slumped, and I saw it, fear. He was trapped, and he knew it. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I turned and walked out, leaving him there to deal with the mess he'd created. By the time I got back to the lobby, the clinic was buzzing with tension. I saw Linda standing near the front desk, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked at me, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. She rushed over, grabbing my arm. "David, wait," she pleaded. "Please, we need to talk." I yanked my arm free, glaring at her. "There's nothing to talk about, Linda. It's over." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second, I saw the woman I used to love, the one I had built my life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had lied to me for 2 years. "Please, David," she begged, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I felt so alone in Paul. He was there for me, but it didn't mean anything. I never stopped loving you." I stared at her, my heart cold. "Didn't mean anything? You destroyed us, Linda. You lied to me for 2 years. How can you say it didn't mean anything?" Tears streamed down her face, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can make it work. I shook my head, my chest tight. No, we can't. You killed any chance we had the moment you chose him over me. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed into tears, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow emptiness. I turned and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing in the middle of the clinic. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift. Word of Paul's affair spread like wildfire, not just through the clinic, but the entire community. He was forced to resign under pressure from the board, and his reputation was in shambles. Linda, too, faced a backlash. She couldn't go anywhere without whispers following her, people staring, judging. Her job was on the line, but I didn't care enough to find out if she lost it. I filed for divorce soon after. The papers were served, and though Linda pleaded with me to reconsider, I couldn't. There was nothing left to save. For a while, I thought that would be the end of it, that the worst was over. But then Clara dropped the final bombshell. We met up one last time, after everything had settled. I expected her to be triumphant, satisfied that Paul had been destroyed, but instead, she looked different. Lighter almost. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the same calculating smile from before. David, she said, as we sat across from each other at the cafe, there's something I need to tell you. Something I didn't mention before. I frowned, suddenly uneasy. What is it? She took a deep breath. I wasn't exactly faithful to Paul, either. I blinked, not sure if I heard her right. What? Clara looked me in the eye, her expression steady. I've been having my own affair. For years. It wasn't just about Paul's infidelities. I had my own reasons for wanting to get out of this marriage. I sat back, stunned. You've been cheating too? She nodded. I was planning to leave him long before any of this came out. But I needed leverage, and this gave me exactly what I needed. I stared at her, realizing that I had misjudged everything. Clara wasn't just a victim of Paul's lies. She'd been playing her own game all along, and I had been dragged into it without even realizing it. So, this was all about getting back at him? I asked, my voice hollow. Clara smiled softly, but there was no malice in it. It was about getting free. For both of us. I didn't know what to say. I had thought I was fighting for justice, for truth, but now it felt like I had been part of something much darker. Something that had nothing to do with what was right. When I left the cafe that day, I felt the weight of everything I had lost. My marriage, my trust, my faith in the people I thought I knew. Clara had gotten what she wanted, but I was left with nothing but the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. A few days later, I packed up my things and left town. I couldn't stay there, surrounded by the memories of everything that had happened. I quit my job, sold the house, and drove away without looking back. As I drove, I felt a strange combination of grief and freedom, like I was finally untethered from the lies that had defined my life for so long. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I was free. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.